This is another iRaw podcast.
Welcome to Our Hen House. This is Jasmine Singer.
And this is Marianne Sullivan.
And we're so excited that you're joining us for this week's show. Marianne's guest is Dr. Bronner from Dr. Bronner's.
Actually, it's David Bronner from Dr. Bronner's.
David Bronner. Doctor. Hello, doctor. It's David Bronner, who's been on this show before. We love him. So he's going to be joining us this time to speak about a subject that is near and dear to his heart and to Dr. Bronner's supply chain, and that is regenerative agriculture. And of course, we're talking about vegan regenerative agriculture.
Yeah, I know. A lot of people have the impression that regenerative agriculture, because a lot of people who deal with it and are promoters of it are very into manure. They believe that it's the opposite of vegan, but it's not. And that's what we'll be talking about with David Bronner.
Well, that topic has been coming up on the Flock Facebook page and just in general in our hen house conversations and circles. So I'm really, really looking forward to this. And he's going to be joining you also on the bonus segment.
Yes, of course. He'll be adding a little personal information on that bonus segment. I always like the way the bonus segments get a little bit more personal and down. That, of course, is available to all Flock members. And if you are a member of the Flock, you'll get the email the Tuesday after the podcast goes up with that link. You can always find it on the Flock Facebook page. And if you're a member of the Flock and you're not on the Flock Facebook page, get on that.
Yeah.
And if you're not a member of the Flock, get on that. You can join for $10 a month at ourhenhouse.org/donate.
And thank you so much. We are just finishing out our 10th year exactly. This month is our 10-year anniversary, so it's exciting time for us at our hen house. And before we get to that interview, you might hear, or maybe you don't, hopefully you don't, that I'm using the same mic as you. We're sharing a mic because we are together in the same room in the same town, and I'm visiting Rose, also you, in Hudson Valley. So I actually flew into Albany this time. I usually fly into the city, but I'm doing the city on the other end of this trip.
By the city, of course, Jasmine means New York, because everybody from New York, obnoxiously enough, calls New York the city.
Well, I don't understand. Isn't it the city?
The city.
It's the city. And so I went to Albany, which is also a city and is actually a beautiful one. And I stayed at the La Quinta Inn the first night because I got in after midnight. I love a La Quinta Inn, by the way. Like, as soon as I got all settled into my bed, it was like I was so happy. I was like, I can't remember being that happy in such a long time. But the next morning you picked me up and we went to Cafe Madison in Albany. I believe that they have 2 locations. I just wanted to shout this out because although not a vegan place, I loved this spot so much. Like I 100% want to go back.
Yeah, I had a tofu scramble. It was excellent. And it was very odd because it was a weekday morning at about, I don't know, maybe 10 o'clock. And the place was kind of not just on a street that wasn't that busy or anything. The place was packed.
Yeah.
So who are these people who go out to breakfast at 10 o'clock on a Thursday morning?
Well, aside from us. Yeah. And we had a pretty horrifying experience that night or the next day. We, of course, Rose is 16 or something like that. She's 1 billion years old, basically. And she's deaf and she's got all the charm of an old dog, like just that inherent sweetness that old dogs get. And she decided to go on a little walkabout without us.
Well, the gate got open. I still have no idea how. My gate latches very well, but she was out in the yard. And, we just realized she'd been out there for a while. She kind of lets herself in because she can push the door open. So, she kind of lives her own personal life. But after a while, we're sitting here and we realize she's not here. She was gone.
Oh my God.
She was gone. She was out. Like, it's the middle of the night. She can barely see. She can't really hear. She can still smell really well. And I'm not on a busy road, but it's not a totally quiet road. Oh, my God. It was like the worst thing. Yeah. How long would you say we looked for her? Maybe a half hour?
Yeah, I think we looked for her for a half hour. I'm not sure how long before we realized she wasn't here, though. So I don't know how long she was out, but it was like my worst. I mean, it was my worst nightmare. It was awful. And she's fine. We should have said that at the beginning. She's fine.
Yeah, well, I think that was obvious or we wouldn't be talking about it. Anyway, I found her at a house down the street, which is like an Airbnb. So the people don't live there all the time. And I went up to the door and I said I was looking, and the woman was like, "Oh yeah, I think she was here a half hour ago. She was barking at the back door." Yeah, and I was like, "What? Like, Rose does not look like, she's an elderly dog wearing her very expensive little coat. Like, and the woman, like, knew she was elderly, and she had just left her out there. Fortunately, Rose was still hanging around the back door. I kind of think she thought it was my back door. Oh, my God.
Yeah. Well, we have to get on with this, though, because she has her acupuncture today.
Yeah, she does have her acupuncture today, which does seem to, those back legs. Oh. Yeah.
Oh, she's okay. I have to say, switching gears, I am completely freaked out by all of the coronavirus stuff out there. And I don't tend to get like that freaked out about things. Maybe it's partly just because I watched a Netflix special about how these viruses could basically wipe out humankind. And it was disgusting and awful. And maybe it's because I have to fly out of JFK in a few days. And so I'm being selfish about it. But my God, I'm scared. And the masks were all sold out at the drugstore we went to.
Well, yeah, I'm sure everybody is freaked out. It's pretty scary stuff. But the thing that's freaking me out was the reaction I got on Facebook when I posted an article about it. I posted a couple of articles. One of them
on our hen house.
Yes, on our hen house. I do most of the posting of news on the Our Hen House Facebook site, and one I posted was an article from the Washington Post, and I pointed out that Chinese health officials confirmed that the pneumonia-like virus came from wild animals sold at a market in Wuhan. And somebody commented that they were very disappointed in our hen house because she was agreeing with another post that had talked about how much bashing of Asians there is, which I am really aware of. But then another post I put up where which was a much more vehement article from the New York Post about the horrors and truly horrors of the wild animal markets in China. And I put what goes around comes around. And I got a lot of people just really Asia bashing and China bashing. And I just think, when I was very aware when I was posting, I should have put a more careful blurb at the top. But I was very aware when I was posting it that whenever you post anything about China, well, China's the new most fashionable place other than here that does something to animals that we don't do or that somebody doesn't do, and they feel totally delighted in being completely racist and horrible, completely ignoring that this country invented factory farming. And they're probably people who happily eat meat for the most part, because they're probably not very thoughtful people. And, it drives me crazy. It's like, as I said, it's currently, you usually see it about China. I remember in the past, it was when the bushmeat controversy in Africa was such a hot topic, constant racist comments about that. It's really unbelievable how people give themselves a pass for all of the animal abuse that they personally contribute to, but are so happy to say horrible things and racist things. And as somebody pointed out, I think it was Christopher Sebastian, like, this is even ableist because it's kind of blaming the people who got sick. Like, they're so happy to bash everybody and totally give themselves a pass. I think this is something we've talked about before, too. And I think it's a very similar situation where people are so horrified about street dogs in other countries because we clean up our stray animals in this very tidy way of gathering them all up and taking them someplace secret and killing them behind closed doors. Like, we're fine. Apparently that's fine. As long as it's secret and clean and nobody has to see it, we take no responsibility for it. But, when something happens out in the open, as these markets are in China, it just brings out the racism in people. And I tell you, like, we're living through a time where you just realize that racism is not just alive and well. It's going stronger than it ever has before.
Yeah. It was really unfortunate, all of that. And I know also you take a lot of that personally too.
The comment, don't read the comments, was written for me. I get so upset.
I know you do. And it's everyone always says don't read them, but before the internet culture, especially those of us who came of age before the internet culture, we became these sensitive individuals, which is one of the reasons why we went vegan ultimately. And so it's hard to just kind of draw a hard line to just be accused of something. Like, I've heard, I don't want to go too much into this, but we've had, I don't know what episode this is. I'd have to look on a list that's not in front of me, but I think it's like 525 maybe. And, every now and then someone will hear of a guest that we had on one episode that they hate, and they'll just say awful things about our hen house for having that particular guest on one episode. And it's like, okay. I mean, we have like thousands of other activists you can listen to, and of course we don't agree with 100% with most of them.
But the thing I do want to keep focusing on the issue. And while I said what goes around comes around, it was much too oblique, and I should have made clearer what I believed. It's not like I feel like the people who, well, it's not even the people who are participating in this who are getting sick. It's everybody who's getting sick because it's become human to human transmissible. So that doesn't even make any sense. But the point is, I was thinking in a much like bigger sense. Like it is a fact that our mistreatment of animals does lead to horrible consequences for us. Diseases are one of them. Other kinds of illness can be another one. It is certainly not associated with any particular culture. It is universal, and I think it is an important thing to keep in mind, that especially as big as the world has become and as complex as the world has become, fooling around with these pathogens is even more dangerous than it used to be.
Aside from the coronavirus, we watched something the other day while we were hanging out here, which is The Joker, which is of course starring Joaquin Phoenix, who is like a badass vegan, like the badassiest of the vegans right now, I think. And I just want to say I didn't like The Joker, but I'm not sure. I think maybe I'm in the minority there in terms of my dislike of The Joker.
No, I don't think so at all. It's a very controversial movie. Some critics loved it, some critics hated it.
Well, this critic didn't like it, but I thought that he was absolutely phenomenal in it. Also, did we talk about, I honestly don't remember if we talked about the fact that like recently was it the SAG Awards that he got Best Actor? Was it SAG Awards?
Well, he's gotten so many. Yeah. I think it was the SAG Awards, but he also got the other one.
Oh, okay. Are you talking about the Golden Globes?
Yeah.
Okay. So as he was still in his tux, he went right to an LA Pig Save event, which, we just had them on from Pig Save, and it is a very powerful, moving event and devastating, tragic event that happens every week in LA where I live. And he showed up, and, he was just there, and someone from Jane Unchained interviewed him, and it made like enormous headlines everywhere. So I really adore Joaquin Phoenix. I'm sure that everyone listening probably agrees with me that he's an incredible human being who is bringing light to these issues in a way that a lot of people haven't of late. There are a lot of vegan celebrities, but a lot of them aren't speaking out on animal rights, like ethics-based platforms. And so, God, I appreciate it when someone like him comes along.
Yeah, no, that was an amazing moment, and it got loads and loads of press. I'm sure you've all heard about it. And, it was one of the highlights of my week.
Well, you had a busy week. You went to Yale.
Yeah, well, I don't attend Yale. I went to this talk at Yale, which was really interesting. It wasn't actually an animal rights talk. It was by this guy, Ted Hamilton, and the name of the talk was Climate Activism on Trial, Civil Disobedience and the Climate Necessity Defense. And he is the co-founder of the Climate Defense Project. It's really interesting. What they do is, among the other things they do, is come up with strategies and defenses for activists who are, as the title implies, are committing civil disobedience in defense of the climate, such as the pipeline folks and other kinds of protests. And it was really interesting. I'm really excited about their work. This is something I'm really, I've always had a real interest in. It's something that, kind of faded out, using these necessity defenses, which is basically saying, I committed this crime because it was necessary in order to avoid a far greater crime. And there started to be the use of this kind of defense in animal rights activism years ago, and then the Animal Enterprise Terrorism Act got passed, and everybody got really scared for pretty good reasons, and the activism went in a different way. But currently, we are seeing, as you're probably aware of, we are seeing this kind of defense coming to the fore, and we'll be hearing a lot more about it because of the work of Direct Action Everywhere and what they call the right to rescue, and which is a very similar kind of defense. So this is I just think this is the most interesting and hottest area of the law right now, because we're just not going to save the animals, we're not going to save our planet without people doing disruptive things. And we don't want them going to prison if we can possibly avoid it. And I hope we can. I'm not sure we can.
Well, I think that's as good a time as any to switch gears, because I'm really excited about this interview, and Rose has acupuncture soon. So let's do that. Let's transition to your interview with David Bronner, who is the CEO, that's Cosmic Engagement Officer of Dr. Bronner's, the top-selling brand of natural soaps in North America, and producer of a range of organic body care and food products. He is a grandson of the company founder, Emanuel Bronner, and a fifth-generation soap maker. Under David and his brother Michael's leadership, the brand has grown from $4 million in 1998 to over $111 million in annual revenue in 2017, and they focus a lot of that on supporting animal rights causes, including our hen house. So you'll be hearing Marianne's interview with David Bronner right after this. If you like what you're listening to, and I hope you do, then please consider taking a minute out of your day today to leave us a friendly review. You can do it on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify or Stitcher or on Facebook or wherever you listen to podcasts or wherever you're listening to this. The more we get out there, the more our hen house will be in front of people's eyeballs when they're putting in search terms in their podcasts, and the more we could join forces together to elevate the voices of the animals and change the world for them. So thank you so much in advance for leaving us a friendly review.
Welcome back to our hen house, David.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Marianne.
I'm so thrilled to have you. I think that so much of what you do is so fascinating, especially we've talked about a lot of things. We talked about Dr. Bronner's in your past interview, and we covered like a wide range of issues. But the thing I really want to focus on is regenerative organic agriculture projects that you're involved in, or that you just support. You know a lot about this. I want to know a lot more about it. And so I'd like to take a deeper dive into those projects and your thoughts about how we should be growing things, and how a company that is vegan, such as yours, and believes in ethical sourcing pulls that off and still is very successful, and in fact growing exponentially. You are in a very particular position to have a lot of knowledge from your perspective, not as a grower, but as a user and a producer of these products. So first of all, let's start basics. Can you define regenerative agriculture for those, which I would include myself in? I've heard the term, but I only have a general understanding of what it means.
Yeah. First, let me just comment on, being a vegan company. We, I myself am vegan, have been vegan since '96, and we have many vegans in on our staff, including upper management. But like my brother, for example, who's I'm 50-50 with Bronner's, is an ethical omnivore. It's not quite on my wavelength. But, as a company and our formulation practices, we are vegan, and we have plant-based organic lunches. So vegan lunches free every day for employees. But then what we'll do is we'll fund like grass-fed beef and pasture-raised chicken for the taco truck out front. So that's not free. People still have to pay for it, but we'll subsidize, the better versus worse meat there. So I don't want to give a misimpression that, we're just kind of balls of the wall vegan company, but, we have a very strong vegan core and advocacy within our company, but we also do have omnivore. Ethical may be controversial in this context, but to say better versus worse ethic. And so the regenerative organic standard.
I just want to, before you get to it, since you mentioned that, I really appreciate your clarifying that, and you're going into the detail and talking about, perhaps a few compromises you make personally, but that are good that allow you to work with your brother and work in your company. It's really interesting to get into the real world and trying to be vegan and still work with other people. And I think that has a lot to do with the regenerative agriculture too. So now let's get to that question.
Yeah, right on. And actually it really is, it's the same kind of a little bit of the dynamic of figuring out what is the most ethical but pragmatic approach in, that in the world that we live in. Personally, I would love that everyone ate regenerative organic vegan food and rewilded as much as the planet as possible. But, given that we do live in a world where, people are going to continue to eat animal products, how can that be produced out of our agriculture in a way that isn't a complete ecological and ethical disaster? So that's, I guess maybe just starting off with the most controversial piece of it first. So the Regenerative Organic Standard brings together the best of the soil health, animal welfare, and fair labor movement. Again, this is, it's not a vegan standard, but basically what we're saying is that if you're going to eat meat, it should be raised it should come from an animal who, was able to fulfill its 5 freedoms, fulfill its instinctual behaviors, basically live out its life on pasture, no CAFOs, no cages. So people who may be familiar with the different animal welfare standards, so it's GAP 4 or above, so Global Animal Partnership level 4, so not 1 to 3, but level 4 or above, which is pasture-based, and then the animal welfare approved, and then certified humane, but only the pasture level. So certified humane, kind of like GAP, has a couple different levels. So it's the pasture level, and then the soil health piece of the so if we look at industrial agricultural's impact on the planet, I mean, it's a complete disaster. Even just from a vegan, from a strictly vegan perspective of just impact on wildlife and animal life, it's a scourge. I mean, we're living through the sixth great extinction event. It's like a comet's hitting the planet, and 1/3 of the Earth's surface is under industrial agricultural mismanagement. And we're systematically just destroying ecosystems, putting huge amounts of synthetic fertilizers and pesticides onto the soil. And these pesticides are not, they don't stop killing on the farm. They get into the wild, they get into our waterways, and they just keep killing. And especially the neonicotinoids. And these are really powerful insecticides that coat most seeds in conventional agriculture now. And they're called systemic pesticides, which means they permeate all the tissue of the plant, so that all parts of the plant are deadly to insects, but not just insects. That insect neonicotinoid gets, it doesn't just go in the plant, it gets in the soil, it gets in the water, and, it's killing amphibians and birds. So just the impact on non-target wildlife of these insecticides is massive. So Regenerative Organic is saying, well, I mean, like organic, that you can't use these systemic pesticides, but then that, rather than, organic, oftentimes it's just basically what you shouldn't do. You shouldn't use synthetic fertilizer. You shouldn't use synthetic pesticides, but it doesn't necessarily tell you what you should do. So regenerative organic is basically saying, well, this is what you should do. And it's what good organic farmers are already doing. And it's basically smart crop rotation. So you're rotating crops in a way that you're building soil fertility. You're putting nitrogen into the system with cover crops that fix nitrogen into the soil naturally, so you're not reliant on, like, say, CAFO manures for your fertility, which some, or maybe all too many organic farms are reliant on. So Regenerative Organic basically wants to see you, build fertility on your farm itself through smart cover cropping, through composting, and then the other crucial pillar.
Maybe we should define cover cropping.
Yeah, so cover crop. So you got basically in an annual system, which means you're harvesting every year, or the plant dies annually, versus a perennial or tree crop system where it's kind of not. It's a perennial system that lives many years. So in an annual system, which is most of our food is coming from, you're basically rotating in an organic, regenerative organic production system. You're rotating your cash crops, so like your soy, your corn, your beans, your legumes. So if you just keep doing that and keep harvesting without resting the land with what's called a cover crop, like a non-cash cover crop, like you're going to just kind of remove all the fertility from the soil. You need to keep feeding the soil, and that's really what regenerative organic is. It's about, how do you continuously feed the soil? If you feed the soil correctly, it will feed us nutrient dense, healthy food. And the main way you do that is cover crops that are nitrogen fixing, which means there's certain types of plants that will actually take nitrogen from the air and fix nitrogen in a symbiotic relationship with microorganisms in the soil, and actually build nitrogen, which is the number one fertilizer or fertility need of many crops. Like corn is a heavy nitrogen feeder, and many are. Soy actually will fix nitrogen, but as will legumes. So legumes will also fix. So some cash crops will also help fix nitrogen, but others will really deplete your nitrogen and other stores of needed nutrients. So a cover crop is basically you're resting your soil, like would say year 3 or year 4, or every 3rd or 4th year. You're not in production on a given piece of land. You're just resting it and putting in a cover crop that is basically feeding the soil. And at the end of which, like, you'll kind of till it in. And while tillage is necessary, that's another principle, is minimal soil disturbance. You want to minimize the disturbance of the soil. Like the soil's very rich ecosystem of a diverse plant life and microorganisms and fungal networks. And when you over-till it, you're just kind of really disrupting all that. So you want to like kind of minimize the tillage, kind of basically, not go too deep when you have to do it.
Can I insert a question? Because
Yeah,
a lot of
absolutely.
times when I hear people talk about regenerative agriculture, they are talking about, yes, they're talking about the soil and how important it is. And I think there's an increasing awareness of that there are ways to keep soil healthy for future generations and not just abuse it the way, as you point out, we've been doing. But they seem to say a lot, or at least a bit, about manure. And you were saying in the beginning that there are these, welfare standards for animals in regenerative agriculture. But the real question that I want to ask you about, because I know you know a lot about it, is whether there can be veganic regenerative organic agriculture. That's not the easiest thing in the world to say, I have to say. And
Yeah.
just through this cover cropping, just through plants, just through treating the soil well and not getting animals involved. I know that you have this, as you pointed out, you have to work with other people who, are going in another direction. But that's the piece I'm super excited about. Can you talk a little bit about that whether it's possible?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I've spent a fair amount of time investigating all this because I've had the same questions. And yes, absolutely, veganic agriculture is not only possible, but is being done. Like let's say a ruminant, if you are integrating livestock, particularly ruminants, so ruminants would be grazing that cover crop and just kind of like cycling nutrients that way. But that can just be done mechanically as well. And that's what I was kind of saying about just kind of tilling the cover crop. Like you terminate it at a certain point, like when there's enough nitrogen that's been fixed, you would just basically go in and till it into the ground. And that, basically using mechanical versus animal impact to accomplish the same end. So it's absolutely veganic agriculture is quite possible and is being done. Well, I mean, rock is so new. I mean, we're about to commercially launch, so there's not many farms.
Yeah, can you just tell? Did you define what rock is? Can you just tell us what that is?
So that's the Regenerative Organic Certification Standard. So that's the certification standard that codifies the principles of soil health, fair labor, and animal welfare into a single standard. So rather than having, a separate fair trade or fair labor standard and a separate animal welfare standard and a separate soil health, it's basically kind of the one-stop shop, the one ring to rule them all kind of standard that we feel, consumers should look for when they're buying their food or their clothes or their soap.
And while that does incorporate animal inputs for those who are still using them in order to, it's not a perfect standard, but it incorporates all those people who are practicing regenerative agriculture. What you're saying is that you don't have to use animal inputs in order to qualify for that standard or in order to produce great food and keep healthy soil.
No, 100%. And in fact, there's I forget the Canadian, they're a cereal company. You may know them. It's the one something, but they work with a network of farms in Canada primarily, and they may have grown, that are all veganic.
Yeah.
Now, interestingly, most of the farmers are not themselves vegan. They just happen to be like kind of far away from any CAFO source and are by necessity not using animal inputs. So it's quite possible and is being done veganically. Yeah, and that's really important. That the vegan utopia is quite possible if the planet would adopt such an ethic.
Yeah, I like to have a vision. I think you do too.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Even if it's hard to get there, and even if it's hard to imagine, I just think it's so important to have that vision,
well,
to know that it's possible.
100%. And that, for me, in a way I look at it like, let's have the final showdown in 50 years between veganic and regenerative organic with animal input. But in the meantime, we've got the factory farm machine that's just, eating us for lunch, and just kind of being in solidarity with these high animal welfare farmers. That I'm comfortable with that, given the disaster that we're facing.
How do you pull it off, though? Because I think this is the great quandary that so many vegans go through, that you totally pull it off as being a staunch vegan and having that vision, but being able to work with people who don't. And what would you say what goes on in your mind in order to keep that line?
Yeah, well, it's kind of like compassion and rural farming. That's pretty much, that's our primary partner in regenerative organic. It's basically run by dedicated vegans, and but it's like, well, how do we minimize the harm, given that we live in a world where people are farming and eating animals? How do we make it better, not worse? Fewer and less horrible is, I think, the goal. To obviously we can dream about a zero, no animals, all animals living out their lives naturally in the wild is a dream, but...
Well, let's call it a vision. Dream is too vague for me.
Okay, sure. Vision. Yeah, absolutely. A vision that we can drive toward. In the meantime, how do we just get, if a cow can live out its life on grass, versus in a feedlot, that's definitely better.
I think it's important to point out, and I think that you started to say this, and you talked about it a little bit, but I just want to go back to it. Organic doesn't mean, like, if you're buying your organic vegetables as a vegan, you are talking about animal inputs, unless you're growing them yourself, pretty much, aren't you? Because organic uses manure.
Well, yeah, and even in veganic,
by and large,
yeah, it uses manure, and in veganic farming, you still have insect control. Even if it's, that there's always going to be some level of sacrifice in any system, and I guess that's another just recognition that there is a need to control for infestations, pest infestations. In generally, what a good organic or regenerative organic farmer should be doing is having really good perimeter plantings that are predator insect friendly and pollinator friendly, so that you're controlling through natural predation, and we're not reliant on chemicals or in organic you can use, there is some level of chemical control, but they're generally natural chemicals, like pyrethiums and neem oil, that kind of thing. Even soap will be used as a natural insecticide, but generally, ideally, you're doing it through natural predator control. But yeah, you've just got some level of that in whatever system.
Well, especially if you're buying commercial organic, it likely is that there are animal inputs, and even factory farm inputs.
Yeah, and that's, it's kind of like there's a spectrum. Conventional agriculture is the worst, just because you just got the killing power of these insecticides. It's just like destroying all life. It's like there's the silent spring and all that. It's just like ecosystem level death is being dealt by conventional agriculture. Then organic, yeah, you've got depending, you'll have people being reliant on CAFO inputs, but ideally they're building their fertility on farm. Insofar as livestock's involved, hopefully they're pasture, they're living out a life, and in a regenerative organic farm, that would be like the fertility would be supplied from animals that are complying with much higher criteria of animal welfare. And then veganic is, the ultimate, as far as, you don't have animal inputs on the fertility side, but you're still going to have some kind of pest control generally. Unless you're willing to, deal with massive crop loss.
Right. It's apparently very, very difficult to live perfectly upon this earth. But
yeah,
we're talking about getting as close as honestly getting as close as possible.
And that's right. And I think that's the thing, is that it's not like, okay, just because it's like, you can't get to like the ultimate, maybe you still, doesn't mean you shouldn't strive, right? That principle of nonviolence to inflict as less death and impact and violence as possible is the goal.
Nicely said. So going on with this vision, like, let's say we did manage to, and you were talking about in 50 years, if we manage to survive another 50 years, it would be interesting to make a comparison. Let's say we did it, and the whole world went with regenerative, organic, veganic agriculture. Is it possible to feed the world? Is it as efficient as our modern systems? Is it more efficient?
Yeah, 100%. I think that, when you start taking animals out of the equation, period, then, you may not be say like you're producing 70 to 80% in a regenerative organic / veganic system as you would if you're like just socking huge amounts of synthetic nitrogen into it. But in a world where you're not eating meat, I mean, half of our agricultural lands right now are growing grain that is inefficiently fed to animals in cages that are converting plant energy and protein into animal energy and protein in an incredibly inefficient way. So when you take that out, then, it basically would take like half the land area currently probably to feed a entirely veganic population or totally vegan population in a veganic agricultural system.
That's good. I like to know that my visions are at least conceivable.
Yeah, no, 100%. And that's, and the other thing is you could have like animal sanctuary, or you could just have pet cows, I mean,
that's what I always say. You're the only other person I've heard say that. Like, you don't have to kill them.
Yeah, right. They could just graze your cover crops. And,
if they absolutely are needed, which, as you're pointing out, they're not. But if they were, that doesn't mean you have to kill them.
No, 100%. So I think we may well be going there over time. We'll see.
Oh, I hope
but
so.
Hopefully, as just we ethically mature and more people make that choice.
That was a very sweet thing to say. I really hope that we are ethically maturing. I really hope that we have the time to do that. And getting back to more practical questions, now that I've established that the vision actually does work, or you've established it. If we're talking about feeding the world in this way, clearly one of the problems that people really like to eat meat, apparently. I don't understand it, but they do. And it has to be taken into account. But this year, I think this past year has really started to turn things around in that area. How is the extraordinary success of these plant-based products like Impossible and Beyond a crucial part of this vision of changing the way we farm?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's amazing. And Miyoko, I mean, it's not quite the scale of impact, but I mean, Miyoko has just completely hacked the vegan cheese problem. I mean, and others as well, but I'm just so psyched by vegan butter and mozzarella and cream cheese. I'm like, holy moly, man, this is way better than as far as I can remember.
Yeah, totally.
So, it's just really amazing just to see the next level plant-based products coming onto the market. And yeah, I think it makes it a lot easier in some fashion. I still think people need some kind of awakening, but it definitely makes it easier. It's not quite, the major lifestyle maybe decision as it was in the past. Like, it's just a little more easy. It's pretty interesting. I mean, I don't really watch TV, but I guess like a lot of the Burger King advertising and Carl's Jr., they're really making a big deal about these plant-based products, and that's just incredible. It's a dream. I mean, it's a little problematic in the sense that it's still like probably an Impossible Burger is not, obviously an organic lentil homemade patty would be way better than this kind of synthetically modified deal, but it's still like 1 billion times better than the CAFO product. And just kind of goes to show that these like fast food Burger Kings, most of their flavors are like, I guess, manipulated. They just, and whether it's a plant-based product or an animal-based product, they've got their secret concoction of flavor chemicals that they injected in either thing, which just, goes to show like, why. I mean, especially at the fast food level. I mean, there's zero reason to be eating meat. I mean, you can do it, knock it all out, the plant-based version.
Yeah, I think that's becoming clear. I think the meat industry is starting to notice too. They certainly seem panicked about it. One of the reasons I'm talking to you, as I started out saying, is that you're in this interesting position of being not the person growing using regenerative agriculture, but the person who is buying and using and then retailing these products. And so that puts you in a particularly interesting position. What projects is Dr. Bronner's working on, or who are you working with that rings all of your bells, fits all of your perfect definitions of regenerative agriculture?
Yeah, and just before I answer that, one comment on Impossible versus Beyond. I really like Beyond because they're not genetically engineering any of all their ingredients are non-genetically engineered, and Impossible is making a big deal not only about the heme, which is they're kind of simulating the taste of, I guess, iron and blood in their burger, and I actually don't have too much of a problem with the synbio side of that equation. But they're also now, for whatever reason, making a big deal about using genetically engineered soy, which is pretty annoying. Because genetically engineering crops generally means you're engineering them to resist huge huge amounts of weed killer, and dumping massive amounts of weed killer on our farmlands, and that gets out into the environment. I mean, that's deadly. I mean, it's not healthy for us. It's deadly for the ecosystems. So I just want to give a plug to Beyond. I think the vegan ethic should definitely be picking Beyond over Impossible where possible.
Yeah, I think a lot of people feel that way.
Yeah.
In the hardcore vegans, but I'm still happy to see every burger that isn't made out of an animal.
100%.
It is a big step forward.
100%.
But maybe not every step forward exactly.
Yeah, whatever. I don't, especially in this context, I might. It's a bit of a quibble, and for sure, it's hugely important. Whatever the substitute, if you're not eating kefal, that's the most important. That's the prime directive: is don't eat kefal stuff.
All right, projects.
Yeah. So so the first project coming online here is, well, actually we have three, but the first product will be in the market will be Serendipol. So after the tsunami hit Sri Lanka in 2004, one of our aces on our staff, Garo Lasone, and we coordinated on fighting the DEA over hemp, and when DEA is trying to ban hemp way back when in 2001, and we were successful in beating back DEA. And hemp is where it kind of symbolized sustainable agriculture as well as an out of control hysterical drug war policy. But as we got deeper in with hemp, we realized that it could do a lot of stuff, but really it was about the management approach to any crop. It wasn't about hemp versus palm. Palm's often demonized and hemp's lionized, but actually both can be grown regeneratively and both can be grown in a totally degenerative way. And just started to realize what are our supply chains? Like, where can we really leverage and make a difference, and adopt a correct approach that's, fair to the people, fair to the land, we pay the farmers enough that they can take care of their land in a regenerative way, take care of their workers. So coconut oil is our number one ingredient. And Garo had already been working a lot with coconut fiber in Sri Lanka. So we were doing kind of funding a project he had to rebuild fishing boats. Well, that's probably not the best example here, but sewing shops, like basically rebuilding industry, because oftentimes a disaster hits and then all this food and clothes and everything gets dumped on the situation. But then the media cycle moves on, and there's not sustainable kind of rebuilding of the micro industries that are just really crucial in a situation like that. So Garo had been identifying and making micro loans to help get small kind of cottage industry craft level going again. Just really realizing the power that can be had with just having just being really involved and with local partners who really understand the situation and can really help, improve the community. And especially in the context of, a developed world company doing business in the developing world, oftentimes companies are exploiting really lax governmental, environmental regulations and labor regulations, and just really taking advantage of the situation. So we had a goal of going fair trade and organic, and that intersected with when the tsunami hit, and Garo was doing all this amazing work. And I was like, well, let's produce our coconut oil here. Let's partner with farmers and set up a coconut oil operation and produce all our coconut oil for our soap in a way that, we can really leverage our own supply chain to just really help the situation there. So long story short, in 2007, it took a while, but we purchased a coconut oil mill in 2005 or 6 and produced our first coconut oil in 2007, working with over 1,000 small farmers, purchasing coconuts from them on fair trade terms, so at a fair price, both an organic premium and a fair trade premium, and then subsidizing compost and best regenerative organic practices and really helping boost our yields and incomes. And then that money that's paid into a fair trade fund is democratically administered by representatives of from the farmers, from the workers, from all the stakeholders in the community, and they prioritize different projects, whether it's equipment for the local hospital or a bridge, or where there's a bridge got washed out, or just whatever is needed in the community. This committee will kind of prioritize the projects and then oversee and make sure that they're accomplished. And I think to date, something like 2.5 million has now been administered through the Fair Trade Fund at Serendipol. We're the primary customer, but we have other customers. And that project, we didn't call it regenerative organic back in the day, but we were all about soil health and fair labor. Those were like our twin things. We want to make sure that the land is being taken care of, that that our farming landscape and ecosystem looks like a natural ecosystem. It's biodiverse. It's friendly for wildlife. It's not dependent on synthetic fertility and inputs. It's like when you look at a natural ecosystem, there is no external chemical inputs. It's totally self-regenerating. And how do we farm like that? And then also making sure everyone's getting a fair price and a fair wage and safe working conditions. So that basically was regenerative organic, but the term didn't really exist at that point. And so that's basically our first project here that's certified with a product here under ROC. So ROC's basically taking that, fair labor, fair trade philosophy and marrying that with soil health, organic, like best practices. So that's, it's kind of what we were already doing. And it's just great to have a certification that recognizes that.
Yeah, I want to say that I've focused on the other topics more in this interview, but of course the fair trade piece is absolutely crucial, and I think it's something in which Dr. Bronner's really shines.
Yeah, right. I mean that we want to be in partnership with our farmers and our workers, and there's 10 times more impact in our supply chains than in our main manufacturing operation. As important as it is to treat our employees here in our headquarters, stateside fairly, there's 10 times more people involved, farming and processing our primary raw materials. And just all too often that those people are totally exploited in a lot of supply chains. There's a lot of times companies have no visibility. It's not transparent. They're buying from intermediaries and have no idea, and they don't want to know. They just want to buy basically the cheapest material that meets their spec. And that's just a real problem in the world. And it just kind of leads to this race to the bottom and just ecosystems in collapse and like these huge, palm plantations. So another major ingredient, especially in our bar soap, is palm oil. And so this is a very controversial ingredient and is a real good illustration of what corporate industrial agriculture is doing. And generally palm is being farmed in a completely ecologically destructive way. Rainforests are being destroyed in Borneo and Indonesia. Communities displaced, wetlands, just huge amounts of carbon that's sequestered in wetlands. They're just being ripped up and oxidized to the atmosphere. And these plantations, just socially and ecologically so damaging. And then orangutan habitat, the orangutans are going extinct, basically thanks to these out of control palm plantations, and as we looked into it, like I earlier said, that there's nothing inherent to palm that it should be farmed in this horrible way. And in fact, palm is the most efficient producer of vegetable oil per acre.
Yeah, we actually had Leif Cox on, who is a orangutan rescuer in Indonesia, and he pointed out that if they weren't growing palm oil that way, they'd be growing something else.
Yeah, right. Or soy. I mean,
it's the method. Not the crop.
100%. And it's like, where they're burning, taking down the rainforest and the Amazon for feeding cattle, either, grazing land or GMO soy. And that soy is, just a disaster. That GMO soy is just as much a disaster. But in either case, palm, soy, or hemp, can be grown, and hemp can be grown in a terrible way. It's often like, oh, it's the most ecological crop. Well, there's plenty of hemp that's grown in a really not ecological way. So in kind of really researching, well, okay, how do you do a perennial cropping system, tree cropping system in a really regenerative way? And where should we do it, for the palm in particular? And, palm actually originated from Ghana or West Africa. And there was a not-for-profit project there working with smallholders, and we partnered with them. And these are smallholders that have been on the farms for, generations, and, farming, without chemical inputs, very biodiverse farms, and kind of similar to the model in Sri Lanka with coconut oil. We partnered with, at the time, maybe like 300 small farmers of palm. It's now grown to some like 800, and not only farming the palm in a very regenerative organic way with no synthetic input, but and then also best practices with mulching and returning fertility to the field, but then also now intercropping. So it's really the next level. When we're talking about, like, in an annual system, you have a diverse kind of, would say, 7-year rotation of different crops that are all complementary, and you kind of understand, well, what crop is a heavy nitrogen feeder? You want to put in one that'll fix nitrogen before. And so there's a whole calculus in that kind of system. In a perennial system, in a tree crop system, the kind of analogy would be intercropping with complementary species. So if you look at like a forest, you'll have tall trees, mid-level trees, bushes, and ground cover. And when you have a farming system where you replicate that, and so in our case, you take palm, which is like a tall tree, and then bananas and cocoa, which are smaller trees, and then cassava, which is like a ground cover, kind of produces like a starchy potato-like food. It's a staple locally. When you do that in the right way, where you understand how the canopies are going to fill in, so you have to understand like what planting distances that your palm from your cocoa, from your banana to your cassava. But when you do this in the right way, in a comparable area, if you were to do the cocoa, the banana, the cassava, and the palm in just monoculture block, versus in the same area do what's called a dynamic interplanting or a dynamic agroforestry, you'll get a double yield from doing it in that dynamic intercropping way. Cool. And it's because you're maximizing the photosynthetic capture in a way that the monoculture is not. And so you're producing so much more biomass, so much more yield, and you're minimizing pest and weed pressure naturally.
You know what that reminds me so much of is the three sisters in Native American agriculture. I mean, particularly in the area, I'm in the Northeast, so they always grew corn and squash and beans, like intersected with each other. And from what I understand, it's for the exact same reasons, that they all grew better, the
That's
yield
right.
was better, and everything stayed healthy.
That's
so interesting how everybody used to know what to do, and now we've lost all that knowledge and have to rediscover it.
Right on. Yeah, exactly. That's, like regenerative organic, it's knowledge intensive agriculture, not chemical intensive. Chemical is like, just grow your GMO corn and blast it with weed killer.
It's like forcing the earth to produce this food, just battering it.
Right. I mean, it's like not even respect. It's like treating soil as a dead inert medium, making it, basically killing all the life, turning it into dead soil, and then just putting huge amounts of chemicals to bring these super unhealthy crops to harvest. Yeah. And so that's the difference for sure, is just like how, just applying traditional knowledge and methods, like bringing those back, but marrying them with modern understandings of economy and, things that are, that they're, we're not, totally going back to the 1800s, but we are bringing a lot of those techniques forward in the now, but then marrying them with modern insights as well.
Yeah, because we have to produce at scale. This isn't a game. This isn't a, back to the land kind of project. This is like feed the world.
100%. And that, in my rule of thumb, like to that question you had about like, can we feed the world in a veganic system? I mean, it's like you would take like you figure you would produce about 80% of, and I'm saying veganic, regenerative organic / veganic, you would get maybe an 80% of the yield doing it in a really healthy way that you're really taking care of the land and the ecosystem and the wildlife. You get much more nutrient dense food, but maybe at about 80% of the volume, but you only need half as much because you're not eating like inefficient all these animals. And then if you are, I'm not recommend this, but if you are doing veganic and you're relying on all the synthetic fertility, all the nitrogen, all that stuff that's driving us off the climate change cliff, but in that hypothetical, it's 100%. There's no difference. I mean, you can produce just as much if you're relying on the same synthetic fertility.
Can we discuss climate before I let you go? Can you kind of explain why regenerative agriculture is so crucial to addressing the disaster we have made of our climate?
Yeah. So, industrial agriculture, and really the CAFO system is, responsible for, a huge amount of greenhouse gases. I mean, there's obviously debate, but at minimum, it's something like, 15% is coming out of our agricultural system. And it's not just the direct greenhouse gases that are being contributed, but soil is the number one carbon sink. So when you look at like, what are the big carbon sinks? And, the oceans can take a lot of carbon, but they're getting saturated and they're now acidifying. And, reforestation, that's, obviously a big carbon sink. But the soil, the amount of carbon in healthy soil is massive. And it's kind of like the metaphor of reforestation applies to soil. So when you take, and when industrial agriculture comes in, it completely destroys the life in the soil. Like all the carbon locked up in that life is oxidized to the atmosphere. So something like a third of the excess carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is from depleted, mismanaged soil. But when you go into that now kind of disaster soil, like that's at close to 0% carbon, just because it's been farmed in such a horrible way. But if you bring in regenerative organic techniques, where you're not reliant on synthetic chemistry, you're, not over-tilling the soil, you have a smart rotation / intercropping, and you're doing basically using regenerative organic management of your land, within 5 to 10 years, the life in that soil will completely bounce back. Like you will, like the ecosystem will come back to life, and we'll start cycling carbon dioxide. So, we all learn about photosynthesis, but it's kind of mind blowing. And I, kind of forgot myself, but that, everything that grows and that we consume in our bodies, all that carbon is coming from the air. Like photosynthesis is taking carbon dioxide and through photosynthetic reactions makes carbohydrates, and the carbohydrates feed something like 60-80% go directly to making the roots, shoots, and leaves of the plant. But like a full 20% of those carbohydrates are actually exudated into the soil and feed the microorganisms in a symbiotic relationship. And those microorganisms in turn feed essential nutrients and minerals to the plants. And once that soil cycle is restarted, then relatively quickly, the amount of carbon that starts being sequestered back into the soil within, it's something like, would say 20 years, you're back to max equilibrium. There's like a maximum equilibrium in any given soil geographical area. But with, and the most gains are like, you're a bit back to like 80% of your carbon capacity within like 5 to 10 years. And then
that's insane. Because we hear about planting trees, and I'm not going to discount the importance of planting trees, but we don't have time for trees to grow. We're in an emergency now.
And we got to be doing all of it. But
yeah,
you're
exactly.
Right. But
I had no idea that there was that kind of speed in sequestering carbon involved in the processes you're talking about. That's amazing.
Yeah, it's like you're basically almost analogous to reforestation. You're bringing all that life back in the soil, and that's a massive carbon sink. So like when we talk about like terraforming the earth and these like weird sci-fi ideas, I mean, it's just like through doing like farming the right way, we can actually bring huge amounts of carbon back into the soil, which alongside decarbonizing our economy and, moving to renewables, that's 100% what we got to be doing. But we still have a legacy load of carbon that we need to get down out of the atmosphere. And like the number one way to do it is through regenerative organic agriculture on a massive scale.
That's extraordinary. Yeah. Yes, of course, we have to do all of the other things as well, but I had no idea that this was so powerful. I mean, I've heard people talking about the importance of soil, but you've really brought it home for me. Talking a little bit about the other side of climate change, you work with growers in the tropics, and are you seeing problems growing because of the climate crisis?
Yeah, I think Sri Lanka is definitely, it's hard to like attribute any single thing, but it does.
That's always the trick, that it's impossible to exactly pin it down. And so that's how they avoid taking the blame for it. But yeah.
But that said, there definitely seems to be an increasing frequency of drought that, it's definitely hard to negotiate. But that's another big benefit of regenerative organic, because when you bring the soil back to life, not only are you, kind of bringing that whole nutrient cycle, natural cycling of nutrients back to life and can grow healthy food, and sequester carbon, but you actually are able to store water much more efficiently. With that carbon, with the rising levels of life and carbon in the soil, the amount of water that can be retained is massive. Even like a huge rain event, if you have like really healthy soil, like real high carbon stocks, you can handle a massive rain event and not have a whole bunch of runoff. Versus like depleted soil. I mean, it's a disaster when it rains real hard. It's all the topsoil is just running right out. It can't handle that kind of rain. It can't store the water. So that's another big benefit to regenerative organic, is the water retaining capabilities or capacity of soil. So you can mitigate the effects of climate change with regenerative organic practices, or the other term is agroecology, agroecological farming practice. So, there's a lot of kind of words out there, but they're all kind of referring to the same, a suite of practices. Like when you adopt them, you're drought proofing your soil, you're producing, more healthy food and doing it in a way that isn't ecological disaster.
Well, this has been unbelievably inspiring, David. It's and really informative about topics that I'm really interested in and don't know enough about. It's really amazing to come away from an interview with actually feeling like we really could pull this off and fix this climate problem, so to speak, if only we would just do it. Of course, there are a few blocks in the way of that, but very inspiring information. And the more information people have, the more empowered they will be to make things happen. You have to have hope.
Right on. Well, thank you, Marianne. And and along with all that is eat way less meat. Zero meat being the ideal. But
absolutely. Well, I think probably everybody listening is at zero.
Yeah.
But get everybody else to too.
Yeah. No. But as far as like global climate change, like that's
absolutely.
That piece needs to be very much part of the
number
conversation.
one.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much for everything you're doing, and thank you so much for joining us today on our hen house. And I just want to add, we're so grateful for the support you give to our hen house. So we really love everything you do. So thanks, David.
Right on. Well, thank you, and thanks for rocking like you do, having me on the show.
Our Hen House has a family of podcasts. In addition to the Our Hen House podcast, which you're listening to right now, you can also listen to the Animal Law podcast or the Teaching Jasmine How to Cook Vegan podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you like what you hear and what's not to like, please leave us a friendly review on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. It helps us tremendously because that's how we grow and that's how we reach more and more people with information on how to change the world for animals. Thanks for listening.
Anxieties are rising. Boy, are they ever. Wow, they're really a wreck this week. All right, our first column is from Meeting Place. And the name of this particular entry is How's Your Maserati? And it's from the Center of My Plate column by Lisa Keefe. And she's talking about the 60-minute special. I don't know how many of you saw it, but it's on the domestic pork supply chain and pathogens and antibiotic use. And it was apparently, I didn't watch it, I admit it, I missed it, but it was apparently pretty crazy and pretty critical of the meat industry. And as she says, spoiler alert, the meat industry didn't come off as heroes. That's kind of an understatement. So the thing she's focusing on specifically, for some reason, which is unclear, is she says the real howler to me was a comment made by Lance Price, a microbiologist at George Washington University and founding director of the Antibiotic Resistance Action Center. You have these big multinational, this is what Lance had to say, you have these big multinational companies that are messing with our food safety system, but they hide behind this image of an American farmer. This is not a guy in overalls. This is a guy in a suit with a Maserati. And she focuses most of her column on how very, very few people in the meat industry actually drive Maseratis. So this is very, very deceptive. And she says it's very tone deaf. I'm not sure whose tone she's really worried about. And she points out that, people don't necessarily wear suits. Most people do business casual, and they might have really, really tricked out pickups, but they don't have Maseratis. That's the problem for them with this report, that they identified the wrong car. So actually, what's really interesting is that it turns out, though she's upset about the misrepresentation about the Maserati, she apparently got freaked out by the report itself, because she one of the things that this report talked about was the fact that there are laws allegedly to protect private property from trespassers that actually extend to government researches if the property owner denies them entry. And this is one of the reasons there are such huge public health problems. And she says that public health may benefit from the data these researchers want to collect. You think? The issue gains urgency as these pathogens evolve and become more dangerous. Yeah, apparently she really picked up a lot of good information from this program, even though, it was unfortunate that they made that big mistake about the Maseratis. Oh, so she actually concludes that meat producers and processors should consider whether laws and regulations that protect them individually are more important than the health of the greater community. Wow, these people are they're falling to pieces. They really are. All right, Animal Ag Watch, one of our favorite columns by Hannah Thompson Weeman, also on Meeting Place. Panera dropping half the meat from its menu. Could others follow suit? All right. Like there are so many stories that have them completely freaked out. This is a big one. And she starts off by saying, to be blunt, 2020 has not started off very well when it comes to public discussion of animal agriculture. First, the Golden Globes went vegan to raise awareness about meat consumption. I guess she missed the fact that the Screen Actors Guild did the same thing. And at least one of the pre-Oscar parties, by the time you hear this, maybe there'll be even more. And the environment. Never mind all of the private jet flights celebs took to get to the awards. This is something they love to bring up, that when celebrities criticize meat production or suggest that people should be eating less meat, what the real problem is that these celebrities are not pure, because they do equally bad things, like flying private jets. And you see this theme repeated a lot. And you know what? This is completely irrelevant. Like, all right, say these celebrities are, I have no idea whether they're actually taking care to cut their emissions in the rest of their life or not. I don't know. But the point is that regardless of whether they are inconsistent in their practices, they're still pointing out the truth that meat is really bad for the environment. Meat is still bad for the environment, even if these people take jets and are. Do these people not ever just study any kind of logic in school? I don't know. But the thing she's really freaked out about is not the Golden Globes and not even 60 Minutes, which she mentions as well, the piece on pork production, but the fact that Panera announcing its plans to drop meat from half of its menu. And according to Panera's CEO, this move is, quote, better for you and better for the world and better for the environment and better for animals, unquote. And as Hannah says, and I have to agree, that's quite a proclamation. Wow, they are freaked out. So, of course, she doesn't think, she's trying to come up with a reason why Panera is not doing this in order to, like, actually accomplish something good in the world. And she points out that meat consumption is actually up, so they can't be reflecting consumer preferences. So she's guessing that Panera thinks this policy may give them an edge with a certain demographic of consumer they are trying to court, regardless of whether it actually is better for anyone or anything. It's certainly not better for consumer choice. Consumer choice to them means not having any vegan options on the menu, I think, because all they're talking about is having half. And so how that's bad for consumer choice, I have no idea. That meat should only be half of the menu. Like, if you want to choose that half, you're still completely entitled to. Oh my God, it's just like the way they think is just so weird. And she goes on to point out other companies may be eyeing the stories about Panera and wondering if they should follow suit. And we need to make sure they have all the relevant information at hand. And, and she links to her, nonsensical links about how the meat industry isn't actually responsible for hardly any emissions. Oh boy, there are like so many things going on. This is from a article in Cadillac News, and that's not about cars. I think it's from Cadillac, Wisconsin. Dairy industry has concern about constant talk of its impact on climate change. I'm so happy to hear that this talk has become constant. I just think it's the best word. This article is really focusing on the awards shows, the Golden Globes, the Screen Actors Guilds, and undoubtedly, it points out, some actors use the national attention and the limelight to speak about causes or events they feel are important. This year, the devastating wildfires of Australia have been a popular choice. In that same vein, so has climate change. Notice how this article ignores the fact that those are the same subject. The devastating wildfires of Australia are actually caused by climate change. And it goes on, while the actors in question feel they are trying to do good to bring this awareness to the masses, they are also pointing the finger. Well, yeah. I mean, isn't that what you usually do? Not just talk about the results, but talk about the cause? In particular, some of the finger pointing is being directed at the dairy and beef industries. Then they talk about Joaquin Phoenix. They really, really don't like him. And how the farmers don't really care. And quoting one of the farmers, getting to this theme again. People, whether it is Ellen, Joaquin Phoenix, or award shows like the Golden Globes, let's point out the hypocrisy. They are flying on jets, eating foods from across the globe, and wearing dresses or suits only once. But let's not eat meat or dairy. That seems to be the problem. Well, there are two things going on here. There's probably more than two. But the two that are that strike me is the thing I just said. Like, even if they are hypocrites, and, I'm not saying they are, but even if they were, and, not everybody is a hypocrite when they do things that are inconsistent. Sometimes they're just imperfect. But anyway, even if they are, that doesn't make it okay to eat dairy and meat. I mean, just because celebrities do things inconsistently doesn't change the information. The other thing is that the people they're talking about, both Ellen, who I know is not vegan, you don't have to write to me about that, and Joaquin Phoenix and the Golden Globes, not so much, but both Joaquin Phoenix and Ellen, like, they're animal rights motivated. They just totally leave that out as one of the reasons that these people are passionate about not eating animals. Just act like it's all about climate change, and so they're inconsistent or actual hypocrites if they do anything that causes climate change, which, in point of fact, none of us can get out of causing climate change to some extent. Also, they're worried about more than the Golden Globes, though. Starbucks. I don't understand this whole Starbucks story, because I haven't been in a Starbucks in a long time, but to my awareness, and please correct me if I'm wrong, they're still making that upcharge for vegan milks. But apparently they came out with they did this huge environmental assessment, and it showed that dairy products are the biggest source of carbon dioxide emissions across their operations and supply chain. Wow. That is huge. That they would recognize that they would do something about that. And apparently they've made a decision that they're really going to be encouraging people to use plant-based milks, which brings up the question that I started out with. Don't they still have the upcharge? How is that encouraging people to use other milks? That's a crazy story. And they did say that they have this plan so I'm hoping to see information that they're at least abandoning the upcharge and maybe starting to upcharge for dairy milk. That would be, or maybe just eliminating dairy milk. That would actually be progressive. Sadly, this article concludes with what they consider a good story. And this is Brightmark Energy. And I don't know whether you're aware of this crisis, but dairy farms and energy companies are getting together to convert manure into methane. And that would reduce methane emissions. And it totally ignores that burning methane. Right now they're just emitting methane into the air because cows emit methane when they belch and when they fart. What they're planning on doing is capturing that. And this is becoming a big industry. This is a big deal. Capturing that and then allowing, and selling it as an energy source and making this, dairy farming, immeasurably more profitable. But also burning methane, they ignore this fact, is not a climate-friendly way to it's better than emitting methane and just letting it into the atmosphere. But once you burn it, you produce carbon dioxide. And it's not, this ain't a substitute for solar energy. It's still a really climate-unfriendly way of producing energy. It's just better than emitting it into the air. So this is going to be a crisis that we're going to have to deal with, and they're going to be more and more spreading misinformation about how this is a climate-friendly way to go. And, just one more thing for us to fight them on. But so far, at the moment, we seem to be winning a lot of these battles. And that's it for this week's Rising Anxieties. Well, that's it for this week's show. I hope you enjoyed it. As always, if you did, please support it by joining our flock at ourhenhouse.org/donate, or by making whatever donation you are comfortable with if you can't manage to join the flock. And you can also leave a good review on Apple Podcasts, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter or Instagram. If you shop on Amazon, you can use Amazon Smile, using Our Hen House as your favorite charity. And of course, please tell your friends about us and spread the word. If you are one of our listeners who already support us, thank you so much. I can't tell you how grateful we are. Thank you to my co-host, Jasmine Singer, and to John Frusciante for his work in producing the podcast. We will be back next week with a brand new show, so don't forget to subscribe in Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. If you are a Flock member, remember to check your email or the Flock Facebook page on Tuesday for your bonus content. And in the meantime, keep doing whatever it is that you do to change the world for animals. You are all that they've got.
For more great iRaw podcasts, visit irawpod.com. That's iroarpod.com.